Thank you. You got it? All right, we're all set. So a couple apologies. First of all, I do apologize that it has literally taken a few years to get up here, and thank you to Susan for being, let's say, lovingly persistent with me and very patient. Some of you know, obviously, I work for Moz in Seattle, but I actually live with my wife and family in the suburb of Chicago. So it's very sad that I don't get into my own backyard very often. The flight up here was actually so short, and I haven't ever experienced this before. They had a little bit of turbulence, like 5 minutes, and so the drink cart was delayed, and I was right in the middle of the plane, and so the one drink cart started coming from the front of the plane, and the one started coming from the back, and I'm kind of watching them, and they're like converging on me, and I swear that the one cart got one row in front of me, the one cart got one row in behind me, and the stewardess just started to ask me what I wanted, and then the announcement came on that we were about to land, and they both just left and scattered. And so it was so short that I didn't even get a drink. I don't blame you for that. I blame American Airlines, because as usual. I have to apologize for my non-standard keynote garb. I just came back from a trip with my family from Italy and Greece, and I have a 5- and 7-year-old, and so 4 days later, I'm still jet lagged, and I got on the plane. I started to pack for yesterday. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to live it up. I'm going to stay on vacation, going to live the dream. So this is my cruise ship dinner, my cruise ship dinner look. And then my third apology is the second part of this title, How We Get Keywords Wrong. There's so many posts out there. You've seen the videos and the blog posts, how we're doing everything wrong. Literally on the internet, we are doing everything wrong. And about a year ago, I hit my critical mass. I saw this video from this guy, how you're taking off your shirt wrong. And I got so mad, and I watched this video, and I'm like, after the video, I decided that I was going to not only keep taking off my shirt, I'm not going to take off my shirt, I'll tell you that. I was going to not only just keep taking off my shirt wrong, but I was going to do it more wrong just to piss this guy I'd never met off. I was just so angry at him. And it was one of those where it's like, if you do this, you wouldn't have to turn it inside out or something when you washed it, and you would save like 1 second a day. And he walked you through that math of like, well, if you save 1 second a day, that's like 6 minutes a year, and over 50 years, that's 300 minutes, that's like 5 hours. And I'm thinking, first of all, it's gonna take me 4.5 hours to learn what you did after my half an hour of angry shouting. And second, I spend like 15 fucking hours a day on Twitter. Maybe I could start there and not on the 5 hours of my life that I'm gonna spend taking my shirt off wrong. So I have stuck to the old way of shirt taking off. But I think there are certain things that are not 1 second a day problems. They are kind of fundamental problems in our thinking. And I think we've been approaching keywords from the wrong perspective for a while, and from this perspective of almost vanity. What do we want to rank for? What do we want to rank for because we think it's going to generate volume, it's going to generate clicks, but we're really still in this head term mentality. We're looking at search volume, we're looking at this kind of opportunity metrics, and we create these metrics in our own tools, so we're to blame and to some extent for this. But we don't understand the intent of the searchers when they use these keywords. And I think this is becoming more and more important. And I think it's not just kind of an altruism of matching what searchers want, but I think Google is getting better about understanding intent and matching to intent. And if we don't start to follow what they're doing, we're going to not only stop ranking, but those keywords are going to stop performing. And so I want to talk a little bit about intent today. I want to talk about how intent maps to the buyer funnel. I want to try and make it not hand-wavy. I think we can talk about intent in kind of a very fluffy, sort of wishy-washy way. I want to show you a study that we've done recently that we're still working on for our product, a very large-scale CTR study where we're trying to map intent and show how intent is affecting searcher behavior. And so I hope I can really pin this down into data of how this matches real SERPs, how Google is mapping intent to SERP features, and how this is dramatically affecting, maybe infecting also, click behavior. And so bring this down to earth a little bit. I want to start with this mythology. I think we still look, in our minds, we still think about SERPs this way. We think that a SERP is a collection of pristine blue link organic results and ads. And for organic SEOs, we look at it and we go, yeah, we know those ads are there, but they're kind of there through a haze, and there's this thing that called PPC that exists, and it's like the Loch Ness Monster. We see it in the distance through the fog. We think maybe that's a head and a neck. and we know it's out there, but we don't have to worry about it. And from the paid perspective, we go the other way. You know, we have these ads, we focus on the ads, and there's that organic stuff out there. But this isn't what we really see. Every single keyword is not some combination of just organic results and ads. What we're seeing is a divergence where the kind of features Google shows and the kind of SERPs we see differ dramatically by the kind of intent. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. This is a strongly informational SERP, sinus infection treatment. And we've got a couple things going on. Not only do we have organic links, we don't have any ads at all. We have this knowledge panel, this medical knowledge panel, if you've seen it on the right. This is the custom content that Google has created with the medical industry. Not only do we have this custom panel, but Google is actually seeing that we put treatment in there, and it's jumping to the treatment tab in that panel, which isn't really even like the home. And so you can have this entire informational journey inside that panel. And you start clicking around the panel, and you get this horrible picture of a sinus infection, which seems pretty accurate. And you can have this very rich informational journey without ever really going to an organic result. And then over on the left, we have this people also ask box, and we can start clicking on those. And again, we have this entire kind of informational journey that's happening outside of organic. And what's happening on the paid side? The paid side is not this plus a couple ads. This is what paid search looks like in very competitive verticals in 2018. Here's 4 ads on the top, a research carousel. This only came out a few months ago. 9 shopping ads on the right. I zoom in just to show you things, but this is my entire screen above the fold. 13 ad placements. This research carousel, I'll show you later, is a driver to basically push you down the funnel to more ad placements. This is a very fundamentally different kind of entity than that informational SERP. This is not just some combination of a certain number of organic, a certain number of ads. These are very different animals. This is another shopping entity. Wedding dresses or wedding gowns, I think, on this one. So we got a local pack, because you're probably going to try and go to a shop. But we have the shopping result up on the top, and you see these filters. These are fairly new. You can start clicking on these and actually have a search journey within this set of PLAs. So you're doing things like, oh, I want a Vera Wang between 600 and 1,000, and I want it in lace. And you can start to select these things and have an entire shopping experience just within this carousel where you never even get to the rest of the SERP. And so these experiences, these informational and these commercial things are becoming very, very divergent kind of SERPs that take different keywords and that take a different approach. So I want to try and pin this down to an intent model. And I think most of you are probably kind of familiar with the classical navigational, informational, transactional. I want to expand on that a little bit. This is not fully original. Google has done some of this expansion. One of these things is kind of a unique idea I want to talk about. I'm going to talk about commercial instead of transactional, because the old transactional model was kind of anything like lead gen, stuff like that, clicking on a form, filling out a form. So we're going to talk about really more shopping and buying things. But I want to start this discussion with this, which you've seen. This is a CTR curve. So we did a large-scale study at Meyers in the last couple months, Russ Jones and I. And we're used to seeing this average CTR curve across all the SERPs. And this is a pretty typical one. You get that little weird bump in the middle. But number 1 is getting somewhere in the range of 30 to 35% clicks, and then we see that drop off and that kind of power curve. You've seen this a lot. But this is an average of a whole lot of things. And I think it's useful. I think it's more useful than just saying we rank number 1 through number 10 and kind of drawing that line. This curve is meaningful. But this is an average of a whole lot of very, very different things. And so I want to show you some of that data. This is an organic-only CTR curve, which I'm going to use as my baseline. So this is when we just have 10 blue links. So you can already see that we're bumping up about 10% in the number 1 position when there aren't all these other things going on. And so I'm going to kind of use this as my baseline to show you what's happening with these different kinds of intent. So the first intent I want to talk about is brand intent. We sometimes call that navigational. But this is when there's a clear dominant intent for the query. The big feature we see Google using to show us this is these expanded site links. So here's an obvious one. Google is obviously a brand on Google. I think we can all agree on that. They have these 6 expanded site links. They take up a lot of the real estate for number 1. They have news, top stories. They have that knowledge panel. But you don't have to necessarily be a huge brand or a huge company. Here's one for MN Search Summit. Obviously, this is a dominant intent. This is an event, it's well represented, it's got good coverage. Google understands that this probably means just one thing, and so they're rewarding that with site links. If we look at just the SERPs that had site links, and we say that, look, this is a pretty strong signal of brand intent, the light blue is that organic only. The dark blue is the CTR curve for brand intent. You'll see that we kind of hit the limit on my 50%. What do you think we have to expand that y-axis to? Can you go 60, 65? 80% click-through rate in the #1 position just for SERPs that have site links, any kind of site links of any count. It's a dramatic difference in the kind of intent of that SERP. It's not just that they've added this feature and slapped it on there and said, we're going to give it a couple of links. Google has said this is a clear signal of brand intent. And we're seeing almost double the click-through rate in the #1 position and a huge drop in #2 to almost 0 after #3 or 4. If you're not that dominant brand, then this isn't a SERP that makes any sense for you to be on. I want to distinguish between two kinds of informational SERPs, and I think this is an important model for the next few years for us. The first one I'm going to call informational open. And this is something we've talked a lot about the last couple years, which is featured snippets. So essentially, this is an informational SERP feature where you have a chance to rank in it. A featured snippet is sort of organic. You have a possibility to rank in it. That's coming out of a site. There's two kinds, so I think this is a little tricky, and you're going to see this in the CTR curve. There's the featured snippets where it's kind of a paragraph or a list, and you have a pretty good chance that you're going to click on that and read more. And then there's this kind of thing where, when does Skynet become self-aware? August 29th. All right, if that's all you wanted to know and you're doing a little movie trivia, you're kind of done. And so I think what we're seeing is kind of two different things where we're going to talk about later. This is something maybe you want to stay away from because this isn't going to get that click, where the other thing where people are going to naturally look for more information is something that has some value. That green is the CTR curve for a SERP with just a featured snippet. And what's interesting is we don't have this is clickstream data, so we don't actually know what clicks went to just the snippet, but that same URL has to rank on page 1. So we're kind of adding it to its position on page 1. And what we see is that on average, we get a drop in #1. But then for #2 through #4, we're actually seeing a boost, where being in that box at the top is giving you a better click-through rate than you would have had if you were just in that 2 through 4 position. And we're going to talk about that later, but we're seeing kind of an interesting interaction that maybe being #1 and having that isn't so great because being #1 was already such a strong position, but being in that kind of 2 through 5 range is pretty good and it's giving you a boost. I think this is also an artifact. We can't separate the ones where there's a clear answer, where people are going to kind of look at it and be done, and where people are going to explore more. So what we're seeing as we dive into the data is there are featured snippets where click-through rates are amazing, and people are naturally going to explore, and that's what we're going to try and find out how to find today. And there's the ones where they just kind of get the answer and go. This is the one that kind of shocked me. Maybe shouldn't have, but it was even more pronounced than I thought. This is what I'm going to call informational close. So this is essentially the knowledge graph. These are things that Google is just giving the answer, and you can't really compete for it. You can't get a link. You can't get a click. So here's, who directed Terminator 2? James Cameron. That's just a fact in the knowledge graph. It's in the knowledge base. They show it to you. You're done. That's all you needed to know. No one's going to get a click from that. We're also seeing a big expansion recently in these definition boxes where Google's just pulling that data again from knowledge graph. It's rich data. They might have this companion knowledge panel. They're kind of strange, whether that's useful or not. But again, there's nothing you can really compete for. You can't get yourself in that box. You can't get that click. This is just taking clicks away from organic. This is taking a lot of clicks away from organic. This is the average CTR curve for SERPs with just a knowledge card. We're seeing a drop of 2/3 in the #1 position and everything else below. It's just a massive drop-off. These are not SERPs that are well served for organic search marketing because people are getting this answer and they're leaving. And that answer is not attributed to anyone. And finally, we have paid, what I'm going to call commercial. This is a shopping carousel. I did some for robot vacuums and robot lawnmowers because I've been feeling a little lazy. Here's kind of another example. This is an interesting one because you don't see this very often, but we see a featured snippet. But if you look at the featured snippet, it's actually for a product category page on Amazon. So this is not the most organic result in the world. And if we look at SERPs that have shopping and ads at the top, I'm kind of cheating a little bit. If we look at just ads, it's not a big drop. But if we look at 2 or more ads and paid shopping, we actually get this very strange curve where we get a huge drop off in number 1, and then a little bump, and then kind of a curve that sits about where everything else is for organic. And so I don't want you to worry about this exact thing. I think the knowledge card one is really interesting. We really have to think about whether we want to go after these SERPs that have closed answers. But the point I want to make with all these curves, and not to overwhelm you at the end of the day with a big chunk of data, is to give you a big chunk of data. But to look at this and say, can you look at this and say that that average curve is a thing that's really meaningful or matters? These different intents have such dramatically different behavior. And the CTRs we're seeing for these are so dramatically different that I don't think we can just treat these all as one big average thing. And so I think we have to think about, for any of these different intents, what's worth going after, what can we rank for, what's a good fit to our own skills as organic marketers. I also want to show you a trend. I don't have CTRs for this because these features are really new. Google's been getting into what they call investigational intent. So kind of when you're at the research phase, you're kind of mid-funnel. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And so we have some new entities. We have this is robotic lawnmowers, I think is the query. So we have this research carousel that's kind of interesting. And you're seeing a lot of these refined bys at the bottom. So here's one that's refined by brand. So this is kind of a query where it's a product, robotic lawnmower. I'm probably interested in buying something eventually, but I don't really know what I want, and I'm still investigating. Well, if you click on a brand at the bottom, like Works, what Google does is append that brand to the query. So they take you to another query, Works robotic lawnmowers. But what's interesting is almost every one of these has shopping results at the top. So Google is not only recognizing the investigational intent and giving you SERP features that match that, but they're actually trying to drive you down the query, or drive you down the funnel to new SERPs that have ads, and to push you down the funnel to buy. In this case, for their own benefit, so they can sell more ads. But they understand not only that you have this intent, but they're trying to push you toward that buyer intent. And so if Google's trying to do this for us, we need to think about how to do this within our own research and with our own content. Here's a totally different example, this new best carousel. And these are kind of interesting because if you click on the articles at the bottom, those are kind of just informational articles. But if you click on the actual product name, and this is a carousel too, so you can scroll through. So I click on the Dyson. I actually get this knowledge panel, which is not a knowledge panel, but is a paid shopping panel, a single product paid panel. So again, Google is pushing me to a new SERP that has a paid SERP entity that's essentially a PLA. So they're trying to get me to go to something where I'm going to get an ad and potentially buy something. They're not just slapping an ad on that original query because they understand that that's not really a good place for me to buy, but they're trying to refine my intent so that I go somewhere which will be a good place for me to buy. And so if Google is thinking about this, I think we need to think about it. So I want to talk to you about how this kind of maps to the buyer funnel. I'm going to go with a simplified, you've probably all seen the ADA model. I'm going to go with the 3-step model. This is just awareness, interest, and action. And I think it's not perfect, but I think we can kind of map this to these intents I've been talking about. Awareness is a really great map to informational intent. This is when people don't really know what they want. They're just kind of trying to figure things out. They're doing a little research. Whether it's closed or open is really important from an SEO standpoint, but they both kind of sit at that top of funnel informational stage. We have investigational in the middle. That's kind of the interest phase. And then we have this bottom commercial phase. I think this also kind of fits the whole brand product model. You know, if you have a very specific brand and product in mind, you're also kind of at that action phase. If you're just typing in a brand, you're typing in something like Google, you're typing in something like Moz, it's a little harder to tell where you're at in the funnel. But if you're typing something like Dyson model number, robotic vacuum, you're pretty deep in the funnel. So what I want to get at is kind of what are the ways we can tackle this as search marketers that are a good fit to what we do? What kind of content can we build? And I'm going to focus on one thing, but I want to take you through kind of broadly what kind of things target this. This is kind of classic informational content. You know, should I get a desktop or a laptop for college? They're just starting to think about a problem they're having. They're going off to school. They realize they probably need something. They don't know much. And so we get a feature snippet on this. Google clearly recognized this as informational. This one takes us to Quora. This is a very open-ended kind of Q&A, and this is the kind of content we tend to see for informational. If you're at that investigational stage, this is also a good fit for certain kinds of content. We're not seeing, these research carousels are kind of new, but if we click on one of these best laptops, or the buying guide from Best Buy, this makes perfect sense for Best Buy. You know, Best Buy is obviously trying to sell you a laptop, but they don't want to just push products on you when you're at this kind of interest stage and this mid-funnel stage. They want to be able to say, you know what, let's give you some good information. Maybe you're not going to buy right away, but if we gave you the information, you're going to come back later and you're probably going to buy from us. So this is a good match for content and kind of a good match for what we do. But I think the challenge for us as organic search marketers is a lot of the stuff at the bottom of the funnel is becoming much more commercial and much more paid search oriented. And I think we have to be aware of that and accept it. You know, I don't think we can hide our heads in the sand. We have to say, look, there are certain things we might just have to pay for, or we might at least have to see what the ROI is. But the question I have, and the thing I think that's interesting is, what if instead of kind of focusing on that very bottom of funnel content, and sometimes we get a little obsessed with like, well, if we're going to convert, we have to go bottom of funnel. What if we push people up a bit to the kind of content that we're actually good at creating? How do we find something informational or investigational and the kind of keywords that happen a little bit higher that we can actually create content for, so we're not competing with all these ads and we're not competing with that ridiculous SERP with 4 ads and 9 shopping results? And the thing that got me kind of playing with this about a year or two ago, we were planning a party or something. I was looking for information on cheese boards. I do a lot of cheese and taco searches. I have very many cheese and taco themed decks. And I was kind of surprised because you don't think of this as a hugely competitive kind of commercial SERP. And here we are, we've got a load of shopping results up at the top. And then even you look at the organic, you know, it's Crate and Barrel, it's Wayfair, it's Williams-Sonoma. I mean, these are people who are actually selling these products. So this is really a very commercial SERP. But there's all these other SERPs that even some commercial brands are ranking for that address this query but are higher in the funnel. So I'm going to give you some examples. Questions like, what cheeses go on a cheese board? This is a featured snippet. It's clearly being seen as informational content. How to arrange a cheese board? Different question, but a different featured snippet with someone else. What cheese is good with prosciutto? Not quite directly related to cheese boards, but it's still in that same vein. It's people who are in kind of that investigational phase that might drive them to a purchase, but we're not dealing with all these ads, we're not competing with all these shopping results, and we have a chance to rank organically. So the thing I want to talk to you about is, it's easy to give examples, but how do we find these kind of keywords? How do we find these kind of questions where we can sit a little higher in the funnel, create the kind of content that we're good at, and serve the intent that will eventually drive people, but not require us to pay for all the ads? One thing I want to start with is that there are some things I do think we need to stay away from. This kind of a SERP, you've seen that CTR curve. When is National Cheese Day? First of all, you missed it. You didn't get me anything. It was June 4th. But Max was up talking about this earlier. If you see that, you're basically done. That's all you needed to know. These organic clicks are there. They're not going to serve you well. This is not the kind of SERP we want to go after. We all saw this and got a little scared. Here's the calculator for 12 times 2. I'm not sure why you're querying 12 times 2, but I had to use this one because it's the only screenshot I have of the next screen. Google did a test for about 2 weeks where they did this to us for a certain very small number of knowledge cards. They took away all the organic results, and they put on this Show All Results button. And I think Will or somebody mentioned that this morning. And then they put the results back, and we all kind of breathed a sigh of relief. Don't. This is coming. And this is coming because Google knows that everything underneath that was pointless. And they gave a lot of reasons and speed and this and that, and all of that's probably true to some degree. But everything underneath this doesn't really mean anything. It's not being clicked on. It's not being used. These are not good things for us to target organically. And if you don't believe that and you think this was just a test, I want to show you some other things that are happening right now. What if you do this same search on Google Assistant? What if you do it on your phone, on your Android phone? All you get is that answer box in Google Assistant. And in fact, what's interesting, if you look under that answer box, you see that search button that will take you to the search results. That looks a whole lot like this. This didn't go away. This has been around for months, and this will stay around. You're only getting back that one result. So there's not even anything organic to rank for. What if you do the same thing on voice? You do the same thing on Google Home. When is National Cheese Day? It's June 4th. You're done. There's no SERP. This is already happening. This was not a 2-week test that Google got rid of and decided is gone. It will come back in some way, shape, or form. So these definitive answers, these knowledge graph answers, this is stuff we just have to stay away from. I think we also have to be a little careful of these because what Google is going to do is expand that knowledge graph. And so a question like, where does Manchego come from? Right now it's a featured snippet, but Google's already going into that snippet and going, you know what, the answer is Spain. I'm going to put that at the top. That's killing clicks. And eventually they're going to put questions like these in the knowledge graph. They're going to expand that, and that organic attribution is probably going to disappear. But a question like what cheese goes with red wine, it's not something that can be easily definitively answered. And what I love about a featured snippet like this, we talked about these click-through rates, they can be good and bad, but just if you look at this, there's a list that says more items at the bottom. They're not showing the whole list. Every list has that every item has that little ellipsis, that dot, dot, dot after it, because there's more information you need to see about this. So this is naturally something that's drawing curiosity, drawing somebody to click on this link. And these are not questions that can be easily answered. So how do we find questions like this? I think I'm going to show you a ridiculous example, but our classic model of keyword research is very bad for questions. So what do we do classically? We open up the giant spreadsheet. We start with kind of this seed word, this head word, and we start adding adjectives, and we start adding descriptors to it, and we create this giant spreadsheet, and we're really proud of ourselves that we came up with 100,000 variations. If you do this for questions, it gets a little stupid. And I'm going to show you a ridiculous example. So if I start with cheese as a root word, and I just decide I'm going to ask all the questions. What is cheese? All right, that makes sense. Who is cheese? Where is cheese? Why is cheese? When is cheese? And how is cheese? Well, how is cheese? It's pretty good. Why is cheese is a little existential. Who is cheese is just stupid. And then what would we do next? We'd add a bunch of adjectives like, what is best cheese? What is good cheese? What is free cheese? What is sale cheese? Grammatically, there's some problems there. And, how do cheese? And how do I cheese? And how does she cheese? And this doesn't work. And then we go, well, we need some synonyms like cheddar, and we do the same thing, and we hand the client this list of 500,000 questions we came up with, and they look at us like we're an idiot, because these are stupid questions that a human would never ask, except for about 3 that we just randomly got lucky with. So how can we, this is a hard job, how can we go through these by hand and say, okay, I had the machine spit out 500,000 of these, and I'm going to go through them by hand and pick the ones that sound smart? You could. You could hire an intern, I guess. Good luck to them. They're not going to last long. Or we can let Google and some tools do the work for us. And luckily, Google already does some of this work. My colleague, Brittany, has done a lot of great work on this. That People Also Ask box, the amazing thing about that is Google's machine learning trying to generate questions from queries and then trying to understand what's a good question. And they're getting a lot better at it. So if we do a question like, where does Manchego come from, and we get that related questions box, we get these questions like, how does Manchego taste? What's a substitute for Manchego? Is Manchego vegetarian? Can I have Manchego cheese while pregnant? These are not things we're going to come up with by just slapping combinations of keywords together. So Google's already doing a lot of this work. The cool thing about these is if you click on one of these, yes, it expands into a featured snippet. We tend to get distracted by this. But what you might not see is at the bottom, Google actually added 2 more questions. And they're looking, I think they're actually using this to some degree to train the machine. They're looking at our behavior and trying to decide what that says about our intent. But they're also generating the new questions from the thing we clicked on. And you can keep clicking on these and end up with something like this, and fairly easily. So this becomes a really interesting journey in questions where I started with, how does Manchego cheese taste, or something like that, and I end up with, what goes on Nacho Supreme? That's not a question I would have come up with, but what goes on nachos is a pretty interesting question that could relate to some interesting content that relates to certain kinds of cheeses that might actually get a lot more traffic and interest and eventually drive people to that thing I'm interested in. Another new thing that's kind of cool, and this does actually kind of fit our old keyword model, we're starting to see some featured snippets with these little add-on tabs. And so what Google's saying is that this question, so who invented cheese, is really kind of a family of questions. and they're giving you more options. So in this case, it's like who invented cheese pizza, who invented cheese on toast, who invented the cheese Danish, who invented cheese chips. I'm not sure what that is. Potato chips maybe. And so if you start to see these, Google's actually kind of saying, you know what? These are actually a family, and you can start to add these, and you can add these to some of your other questions. And now our old keyword model kind of makes sense, but they've already done the work of which of those 1,000 words actually makes sense to slap onto the end of this question. So let's use that work they did for us. I'm hoping we at Moz, and there are some things out there people are playing with, can build some tools to mine these for you. I have not been able to get the engineering bandwidth for that yet, but hopefully you'll see things like that soon. I think you're going to see Stat and some others do some of that. My only pitch today for Moz Tools is that we do have a feature in Keyword Explorer that's a lot of fun that I love, but it's buried, unfortunately, very deep. If you go to Keyword Explorer and you want to do some keyword research on questions, type in kind of a mid-body, whatever you call it, question, not too head, not too tail. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to type in cheese plate. I'm going to get back my list of suggestions. I'm just going to kind of ignore that. I go to all the suggestions. In the top corner, there's this little box labeled Display Keyword Suggestions That. Go all the way to the bottom of those options, and there's one that's called Our Questions that just returns the questions from that research. And so we get these things in cheese board, like how to arrange a cheese platter, what to serve with wine and cheese, what goes on a cheese board, how to plate cheese and crackers. And so we're already getting some information, like, first of all, it's telling us, well, a lot of people use platter as a synonym, a lot of people use plate, but we're getting these interesting, useful questions that people are actually asking on Google that might give us some content ideas and give us these research ideas. And these, it's not to say that we have to target all of these, but they start to tell us that content story that we're good at, so we can craft things that sit higher in the funnel than that cheese board query that's full of PLAs and full of shopping, but is going to serve the intent and drive the people who are interested in that content possibly do a purchase down the road. One thing, I think Max talked about this earlier, we saw that CTR curve for featured snippets. This, and a lot of people have replicated this. This is our data, but SEMrush did a study, Stat's done a study. All of the featured snippets basically have to come from page 1. For you to be in that box, you have to rank on page 1. But there is a very strong preference for the top 5 positions. After about 5, you're probably not going to get in the box. You remember from that CTR curve that there was a boost for 2 through 4? 2 through 5, I think 5 was about even. I think that's kind of the sweet spot. So you have to rank on page 1 to be able to get a featured snippet for a question. But I think this is kind of a great place to look, because if you're in that 2 through 5 position and you can get to that box, first of all, it might actually be cheaper and easier than moving up your ranking just by building kind of more relevant matching content. But the second thing is we're actually seeing CTR improvements for those positions where number 1 is kind of dicey. So if you can find the right kind of question, to target, build content for that, and you're already ranking in these positions, these are really great. This is kind of the sweet spot for what you should be aiming for. And this is where you're going to see definitive CTR improvement. I hope that's helpful and tactical. This is the sad part of the story, unfortunately. This is a moving target, and it's going to get tough over the next couple of years. And we've already talked about this one. This is coming. This is going to happen. Google is going to roll this out for a certain subset of knowledge cards. I think we should stay away from almost all of them. If there's a definitive answer to your question, and that's coming from the knowledge graph, that is a poor fit for us as search marketers. Those are not getting the clicks. We have the data to prove that. We've seen that. We know it as search users, even if we don't want to admit it as marketers. We know we take that answer and run. That's where we're at. Within certain verticals, we start to see trends. Here's one for the book, Who Moved My Cheese? You know, we've got this rich knowledge panel for the book. There's all kinds of information in that. There's information about the author. We can go preview that book. We can buy that book. We can read reviews about that book. If you go to mobile, it's even worse. This is a rich, interesting entity. It's tabbed. It's got all sorts of information. These are really bad targets for organic search. These are not the kind of questions, not kind of queries we should be going after. Google just rolled out the jobs portal last year. Again, if you're in that space, this is incredibly disruptive. So we have to be aware of what's going on with our space. We can't just kind of rely on our tools and say, oh, look, I ranked number 4 for this. Who cares? Most of the action on the SERP is happening in that portal. Any local pack, any kind of SERP, there's just things happening in that box. Nobody's going to get to the organic. So we have to know what to stay away from, and we have to be aware of our own verticals. And voice is going to throw some curves at us. If we do, how do I make a cheese plate, which we were saying, hey, let's go ahead and target in organic, well, voice is going to come back and say, hey, I've got a recipe how to make a cheese plate. Does that sound good? And I'll go, okay, sure. And great, let's get started. And it's going to start reading the listings to me. That's based on recipe markup. And so again, that organic opportunity now in voice is totally different than desktop. So we have to be aware. We have to be careful. I think you do have to go out and try some of these things and see what's appearing. A lot of the tools now, like ours, you can add questions and see what kind of SERP features you're getting, so you can avoid some of this and do it at scale. But when in doubt, just try it out. But I think, and I hope the message here is, first of all, yes, intent really matters. We're seeing dramatic differences between different kind of intent. The kind of SERP features Google uses can tell us a lot about what they think the intent is. I think that there are certain kinds of intent that we're just much better suited to serve. That kind of informational intent, and especially open informational intent where there's a chance to rank. And if we can't get that we can kind of shift the funnel towards that. But I think the good news is that there will always be the kind of questions that Google can't easily answer, can't easily take away from us. So a question like, which country has the best cheese in the world? No one's ever going to agree on that answer. But it's an answer that naturally leads people to want to explore more, to want to learn more, to want to go down your site, to give you that click. And what's interesting about this one to me is this isn't a recipe site or a cheese site. This is a travel destination site. So this is a site that's saying, look, this is kind of high in the funnel, but this is a gateway. Someone who's interested in this isn't a cheese shopper necessarily. They may be someone who's looking for a travel destination. We can give that information, serve their intent, and eventually they're going to come back. And they might be the kind of person that buys that trip or comes back to do the research with us. So I don't think these things are going away. I think this is the kind of thing we have to go after because this is where clicks are, this is what we're good at, this is what we're well served to do, and we have to face the reality that some of these other intents and some of these other things, the clicks are gone. And it doesn't matter whether Google ran that test for 2 weeks or not, this is just the reality we're gonna have. So I hope that's not too depressing and is at least a little tactical, and that's what I've got today. Can't see out there. We got one in the back? All right.
So one of the things I had to talk about is, clicking through on those revised search queries and then ending up on a spot where you're more likely to click on ads. So any advice to the PPC marketer that might have ads appearing? Like, should we watch our search term report for any consistent search queries showing up that are maybe the result of that? Or I'm just trying to...
Yeah, I don't, unfortunately, I've been out of the PPC game for a little while. I don't know that Google will help you understand how they got to that query, because it would be interesting to see that journey down the query path to see if there is something that you could actually target a little higher. But it's definitely interesting, I think now, as people get into these conversational queries and kind of deeper into the voice, I don't want to say voice because people immediately think Google Home, but as they get into natural language and kind of conversational, to look at that query report and see what you're actually triggering, because it might be worth kind of going after, if nothing else, just landing pages for some of those specific questions or for some of those longer tail queries where you think you're really targeting that head query, but the reality is that's probably triggering a lot of stuff down below that you could be at least building some landing pages for or trying to test on, and maybe at least making the conversion rate higher for those. Make those bids go farther. Yeah. Everybody's tired. It's okay. I hope there's cheese out there. Thank you.